Mother relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Boxer is preparing to relaunch women's boxing in 2025. Boxer are planning to match Natasha Jonas and Lauren Price in an all-female bill in London in March to lead a wider attempt to prioritize rebuilding women's boxing in the UK. The 40-year-old Natasha Jonas retained her IBF welterweight title and dethroned Croatia's Ivana Habazin as the WBC champion with victory in Liverpool this past Saturday when Price, 30, retained her WBA title while becoming the first to defeat Bexy Matias of Colombia. A fight for all three titles was already on course before they entered the ring that night, and Ben Shalom's Boxer, the organization that oversaw Shields versus Marshall at the top of a popular all-female bill back in 2022, hopes to feature them on the same card as the WBC lightweight champion Caroline Dubois and potentially Francesca Hennessy. The Saudi Arabian influence on boxing has contributed to the domestic fight scene in the UK and women's boxing globally becoming neglected. But Shalom told Boxing Scene, we're looking at something very special. Women's boxing, if you look at 2022, 2023, was the shining star of British boxing. Everyone was talking about it. Why can't the men be more like the women? Men's boxing had a renaissance with Riyadh season, but women's boxing, other than Taylor versus Serrano, this year hasn't been the same. So we're looking at a big women's night in early March in London at a very prestigious venue that usually doesn't host boxing, and it's going to be something very special. In an ideal world, the winners, Jonas and Price, will be on the card. Sky Sports are massively passionate about women's sport, and that's where we're going to see the most success in 2025. There's a huge responsibility at Boxer to make sure women's boxing gets back to where it was and where we helped to get it to. The plans that I can see going into next year around Lauren and Caroline and around Fran, even talk of Savannah Marshall coming back for her rematch. And Natasha Jonas. There's going to be some big nights.
A rematch with who? Clarissa Shields?
If Natasha and Lauren are the ones in the main event, I hardly think Clarissa will allow herself to be relegated to the undercard.
And the scheduling.
Clarissa Shields is set to be returning to action in February opposite the ring Danielle Perkins. The card that Boxer is planning is set to go down the following month in March. That's too quick a turnaround for Clarissa. So as far as a Shields versus Marshall rematch landing on that show, I wouldn't hold my breath.
Maybe Savannah can come back on that show since she hasn't boxed this entire year, but not opposite the ring Clarissa.
We want women's boxing to be back on the front pages, on the back pages, and we think our women's night with Lauren and Caroline and even Fran coming through, there's some seriously good talent there that can be the next Savannah Marshall, Katie Taylor, and Natasha Jonas that we've had so much success from. The talented Dubois makes the first defense of her title against Canada's Jessica Kamaria on January 11th and asks she will have enough time to prepare for a date in March. Shalom replied, we want the Terry Harper fight that we think makes sense, a unification. That's the fight that we want. We've already put big offers in for that fight, and it's the biggest money that Terry Harper could hope to earn for any fight, so fingers crossed that it gets done. In the past, that's how the Baumgartner versus Mayer fight got made. Alicia Baumgartner, who was with Matchroom at the time, Michaela, who was and still is with Top Rank. It was Boxer that put forward the money to make that happen on their show. So maybe, Harper versus Dubois happens on this one. We'll see.
But has women's boxing been neglected as a result of Saudi influence on the sport?
I disagree. I vehemently disagree. There were some good fights, really good fights this year. Though if the expectation is that every year is going to be as good as 2022 was per se, where you got not one, but two major fights, two long-awaited, anticipated fights in women's boxing, well then you're just asking for too much. That year, you got Taylor versus Serrano and Shields versus Marshall, both of which delivered, but every year isn't going to be like that.
Don't make it about them being women because it's not. Men's boxing is the same way. I remember that 2016 was a somewhat uneventful year in the sport, but that paved the way for 2017.
Where we saw Canelo Alvarez share the ring with Gennady Golovkin for the first time, that long-awaited fight, as well as Andre Ward's long-awaited fight with Sergey Kovalev.
2016, being an uneventful year in men's boxing, paved the way for 2017 to be bigger and be better. And the same applies here, that after you get not one, but two major fights in the sport in 2022, you're going to have to build up the next set of major fights in 2023 and 2024. That's the way it is. It happens in waves.
It's not all the time, and that's definitely not saying that we didn't see some great fights this year in women's boxing, because we did. This past weekend, we saw Natasha Jonas brutalize Ivana Habazin.
We got Jonas versus Habazin last weekend, and we got Jonas versus Mayer before that.
We got Mayer versus Ryan, Sandy Ryan, afterwards. Though not before we got Sandy Ryan versus Terry Harper. That was all this year, and those were all good fights.
We saw the inaugural undisputed flyweight champion crowned in Gabriela Fundora when she fought Gabriela Alanis.
And before that, we saw another undisputed champion crowned in the women's minimum weight division when Senicia Estrada fought Yokasta Valle. Though if what you're expecting is for every fight to be the same size and the same scale as a Taylor versus Serrano or a Shields versus Marshall, you're just asking for too much, because those fights were built up over time. They didn't happen right away.
Big fights like that have to be built.
There are some unbeaten up-and-comers that are coming through in the process of building themselves up, their names, their brand, and their divisions, that will usher in the next wave of big, meaningful fights. But all of that takes time. A fight between Sky Nicholson and Karis Artingstall almost immediately comes to mind. Gabriela Fundora's next undisputed run, Yokasta Valle's next undisputed run.
Ellie Scottney's.
The winner of the Price versus Jonas fight's inexorable showdown with Michaela Mayer
Crawford.
The work that Most Valuable Promotions is currently doing with Canadian amateur standout that I'm excited about, Tam Thibault. There's a lot going on right now, and there's a lot that's being built, but if you're expecting every year in women's boxing to be as big as 2022 was, you're just asking for too much. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that for the men, so it don't work like that for the women. Men's heavyweight news. Dillian Whyte stopped Ebenezer Tete in 7 rounds to continue his march towards one last payday. The heavyweight fight between Dillian Whyte and Ebenezer Tete in Gibraltar seemed a bizarre one when first announced, and it tonight, December 15th, lived up to expectations in both the best and worst way possible. With both men shattered following the very first exchange, the audience in Gibraltar were treated to the oddly captivating spectacle of 2 out-of-shape heavyweights, both too tired to protect themselves, much less move, standing in one spot and throwing punches at each other for 7 rounds. It was then after the 7th that Tete decided he had had enough, and that punching with Whyte was not quite so fun anymore. The second guy to quit on his stool in a row.
First it was Christian Hammer, now it's Ebenezer Tete.
Until that point, both he and Whyte had been having a whale of a time. They understood the assignment. They found in each other a kindred spirit, and they tossed away any notion of defense in favor of whacking their opponent with whatever punch was available to them. This led to countless back and forth exchanges, and it also meant that once both had started to tire halfway through round 1, you would often see one or both poke and prod and push out punches just to continue giving the impression that they were busy working. It was from the outset a demonstration of desperation on the part of both. Tete, who entered the ring wearing a black polo shirt, has never excelled at Whyte's kind of level before, whereas Whyte, whose career has stagnated in recent years on account of yet another drug transgression, is now at the stage where desperation represents his primary driving force. He knows at 36 that he doesn't have a lot of time left, and he knows too that his failure to return clean performance-enhancing drug tests has robbed him of not only a money-spinning rematch with Anthony Joshua, but also additional big fights in the Middle East, which has, during Whyte's absence, become the go-to place for heavyweights. Now 31-3 with 21 knockouts, Whyte will hope it is not too late and that he can pimp out his bloated body one more time for a big payday. Sunday's win over Tete, whom Daniel Dubois stopped inside of a round, won't do much for the Londoner's confidence, nor will it mean a great deal to anyone outside of his camp. Yet that is not the point. These days, all that really matters is that Whyte has a name, some infamy, and now some activity. In time, once people either forget or no longer care, he will be seen once more as a semi-marketable commodity, the perfect B-side for an Arabian Night.
I saw the fight and I enjoyed it. Maybe it's because I didn't go into it with any expectations. I wasn't expecting to be wowed or blown away. It was a nice little fight on a Sunday afternoon.
You know that I would like to see more fights happen on a Sunday afternoon? Smaller fights like Whyte versus Tete. As far as how Dillian Whyte looked, often off balance and tired, pushing out punches, pushing out that jab,
putting on a marginally better performance than Ebenezer Tete, though you could tell that if you put Dillian in there with a sharper guy, a more inspired fighter and more capable, he's gonna go out. He's gonna go out again.
But then again, how inspired can we expect Dillian Whyte to be fighting the likes of Ebenezer Tete at the Rock of Gibraltar? There are a lot of fights out there for Dillian. I could go for Dillian Whyte versus David Adelaide. I could go for Dillian Whyte versus Joe Joyce.
Lawrence Okoli.
Talked about that one in a previous video. Lawrence's expressed desire to face Dillian Whyte, two Londoners. I think you could do good numbers with that at the O2 Arena. Or what about a transatlantic fight between Dillian Whyte and Jarrell Miller? I heard a blurb that Jarrell Miller is in the process of finalizing a fight with Kubrat Pulev for Pulev's WBA regular title that he just won in Sofia, Bulgaria against then WBA regular champion Mahmoud Char.
If Jarrell Miller makes it through that fight and wins that version of the title, he can put it up against Dillian, and that makes for a good fight.
Some good back and forth banter and build-up, entertaining press conferences, and an all-action shootout between limited fighters. Sometimes it's the limited guys that put on the most entertaining bouts, a la Gatti versus Ward.
Jose Zepeda versus Ivan Berenchik.
I ain't too good for that fight. I wouldn't turn my nose up at it. Boxing ain't for the wine and cheese crowd.
Not every fight needs to be a high-level fight for it to be an entertaining one. In a fight like Whyte versus Miller, yeah, I could go for that.
You hear the author talk about Dillian being motivated by desperation at this point, but when you pay attention, Dillian's not doing anything that a lot of younger fighters aren't doing, and some champions, that if he's motivated by desperation, then I guess so are they.
For the next big payday.
There's no need to be negative about it. If you feel he's whoring his body out, what do you think they're all doing?
Same goddamn thing.
Dillian Whyte's fight with Ebenezer Tete was a messy affair, a scrappy affair it was, though still entertaining, and that's what all of this is supposed to be, entertainment. Dillian's not done beating people up or getting beat up in his next fight, and I'm here for it. And finally, ahead of this weekend's big heavyweight title fight, heavyweight rematch, Alexander Usyk versus Tyson Fury 2, AI-powered judging to be used during heavyweight rematch. Saturday's huge heavyweight rematch will have a fourth judge scoring the fight, albeit unofficially and in a very different way. An artificial intelligence-powered judge will be programmed to score all 12 rounds of Alexander Usyk versus Tyson Fury 2 in what is a groundbreaking experiment for boxing judging, Turkey El Sheikh announced Tuesday afternoon. The AI judge's final verdict will not impact the official result of the fight, but it will serve as a trial to monitor how accurately a non-human device can score a boxing match. Scoring has long been a topic of controversy in combat sports, particularly in boxing. Seemingly every week, questionable scorecards are turned in and contentious decisions are handed out, but nothing ever really changes. Observers and pundits complain about decisions for several days after a fight, but by the following week, those complaints are forgotten and another disputed result takes center stage. Attempts have been made in the past to change the way boxing is scored. The WBC allows open scoring for its title fights subject to the approval of local commissions. With open scoring, boxers are made aware of how the three judges sitting ringside are scoring the fight at certain points. When O'Shaquie Foster traveled to Cancun to defend his WBC super featherweight title against Eduardo Rocky Hernandez on October 2023, open scoring was utilized. Foster was told that he was behind on 2 scorecards after 10 rounds and became far more aggressive in the remaining 6 minutes, securing a stoppage win with 22 seconds to go in the final round. AI-powered judging could be the unbiased solution boxing has been looking for. There will be, however, concerns that the sport could become a mere points scoring system if technological judging cannot take into account the subjective elements involved, such as the impact of the punches and how much damage is caused over the course of a round. The first fight between Usyk and Fury went to a split decision this past May, with Usyk winning to become undisputed champion. Fury still insists he won the bout and is aiming to put it right this time around. WBC President Mauricio Suleiman asked for a panel of 6 judges for the Usyk versus Fury fight rather than the usual 3 in an attempt to have a more unanimous result. But the petition never came into fruition, nor should it, because if the issue is human error, then how is adding more humans to it a solution?
It's not.
When the boxing community at large is at odds with the judge's decision, it's usually because it's not in keeping with what they saw and other scoring patterns from other fights.
That what might have won a guy one fight on another show seems to have lost another guy a fight on this one, and they can't reconcile it, that there's not a unanimous and universal way to score a boxing match, and it very much seems open to interpretation. Enter an unbiased artificial intelligence.
The caveat with an artificial intelligence scoring a boxing match is what they mentioned, that the AI might reduce the sport, pro boxing, into point scoring like what you see in the amateurs, where in the pros it's supposed to be a little different. That and the number of people that it would put out of work, which they didn't mention. That if this actually works, and it works well,
who needs judges?
See this in other areas of life and menial labor jobs that can easily be performed by an automated machine.
Like what they use in malls after hours.
Where before they might have had an entire custodial staff, that entire staff is replaced with a machine that can do the job that you need all of them to do. And maybe that works for the company, but that doesn't work for the workers.
In this instance, that doesn't work for the judges. That's a lot of people that'd be out of a job.
There is also ironing out the kinks. What exactly is the AI taking into account when it's scoring a boxing match, and what nuances, bells and whistles need to be added so that the AI scorecard is a reflection of what people are watching? But then again, the people watching, how well informed are they? Do they even know how to score a boxing match? There's a lot to it.
If the whole point is to turn in a scorecard that is a more adequate reflection of what the boxing fans are watching.
What you have to remember is that boxing fans don't always get it right either, and boxing fans have their own ulterior motives, their own agendas.
Who they want to see win a fight.
So when they don't, they start screaming, bloody robbery. But was it? Was it actually? There's a lot more to this.
It'll be some years before anything like this is the standard.
They're just playing with it right now, experimenting. I don't expect to see anybody fired anytime soon.